Okay, I'm going to read to you a letter, and this underscores the violence towards women in the legal community and by Legal Aid Ontario. But in this case, at the time that this happened, this was the Ontario Legal Aid Plan that was administered by the Law Society of Upper Canada. Now, this was dated November 21st, 2007, and it was sent to Mr. Peter Stewart of Stewart, Cruikshank, and Beatty. In 2007, it was Stewart and Cruikshank. It was no longer Beatty, and it explains why in the letter, and I'm going to read this. And this was authored by myself. Dear Mr. Stewart, regarding a request to review and close documents and forward to Mr. Blank. Mr. William George Beatty, and I have to let you know that George Beatty is the brother of Perrin Beatty. And Perrin Beatty is the president of the Canadian boards of commerce, I believe. And he's also working on, I think he's working on NAFTA, I'm not sure. He has something to do with Bombardier. Mr. William George Beatty acted on behalf of my ex-husband, Blank, back in 1997 for a divorce before his being called to the bench. That's the criminal bench. I do not have Blank's current mailing address and was hoping you could look over this information and pass it along to Mr. Blank along with my requests. I'm not sure if your firm still handles legal aid locally, but back in 1993 it did. You will find a copy of the legal aid payment agreement form that was signed by yourself, placing a lien on the property at Blank Street in Gravenhurst, Ontario. If I could bring your attention to a letter dated March 11th, 1997 from Mr. Beatty addressed to the Ontario Legal Aid Plan, it explains to OLAP that they were bringing an application to the court to have the matrimonial home conveyed to Mr. Blank on account of lump sum support and for security of the child. Mr. Beatty never brought this letter to my attention, and I only obtained it through a Freedom of Information request from Legal Aid Ontario. It was never brought to my attention that I would not have to pay support if I signed over the matrimonial home. I was under extreme duress and taken advantage of by Mr. Beatty and Blank when I went to court without a lawyer, resulting me losing my portion of half the value of the matrimonial home. I've been paying support since that time, the fall of 1997. In addition, Mr. Beatty notes in a letter to Legal Aid that there is no equity in the home. OLAP responded back on August 22, 1997, stating that, despite there being no equity in the home, if they lifted the lien and it were audited, Legal Aid would not be able to defend their action. You will also note that Mr. Beatty confirmed the property was worth more on page 3 of a document that was sent on July 14, 1994 than what he was presenting to OLAP via the assessment provided, as well as my bankruptcy trustee. Blank has that amount, and from the sale of the property in 1999, as you can see from the March 4, 2003 Teleport report, I will be forwarding a complaint regarding Blank's conduct with respect to the value of the home, as I presented him the facts that I am presenting you. Despite the number of conflicts between Blank and Stewart, Cruikshank, and Beatty at the time, Blank being an employee of the town of Gravenhurst and Stewart, Cruikshank, and Beatty were the solicitors of the town of Gravenhurst, I have not brought this attention to the Law Society to date. Despite Stewart, Cruikshank, and Beatty being the area legal aid office, I never brought the matter of Mr. Beatty appearing to try to mislead OLAP of the equity of the home in order to convince Legal Aid to remove the lien to the attention of the Law Society, nor to Legal Aid. Mr. Beatty is on the criminal bench, and I don't know where, but Stewart Cruikshank and Beatty ran out of the offices in Gravenhurst, Ontario, and that can be looked up. That's online. I don't know where he's practicing as a judge on the criminal bench. Mr. Beatty must have been aware of the circumstances in which I was denied a lawyer, seeing that Stewart Cruikshank and Beatty was the legal aid office, and OLAP faced a $32 million in liability in its accounting of the legal aid accounts, which resulted in drastic cuts to legal aid certificates that sent me and others like me to court without lawyers. I am currently on Ontario disability benefits and not able to work, and in arrears on my support payments because of my inability to work due to the psychological harm that commenced from the above trauma and exacerbated by repeat difficulties with discrimination in employment due to disability. As such, I would like Mr. Blank to opt out of getting support payments from me, as it says in the March 11, 1997 letter, as well as writing to the Family Responsibility Office to ask them to withdraw the arrears. I'm requesting repayment of those support payments that I should not have been making according to the letter that was sent to legal aid and kept from my knowledge. I have filled out the application to discontinue enforcement of ongoing support and send to the FRO with the information I have sent you. I will also be sending the information to the Auditor of Ontario to let them know about the lien and the sale of the house being more than what Mr. Beatty and Blank tried to get them to believe it was worth. Perhaps the lack of vetting in this case will help them understand how low OLAP is still 100 million short in their accounts. It would be helpful to have a letter and a copy of any forms from Blank showing he has accepted to opt out of receiving support payments by me. I've got all the documents here. This is the letter. Again, that was sent in 2007. Here it is from August 22nd, 1997 here. To Stewart Cruikshank and Beatty. Blah, blah, blah. Gravenhurst, Ontario. Attention G. Beatty. Dear Sir, regarding me, certificate number blank and blank. Thank you for your letter dated August 14, 1997. Please be advised we are not prepared to lift the liens based on an appraisal of value, even if it indicates no equity in the property. If the file were audited, we would not be able to defend our action. We require a copy of the settlement agreement or the court order vesting interest in the property to your client, or the motion before we could consider your request further. Yours truly, D. Prince, Lien Department at the Ontario Legal Aid Plan. Ontario Legal Aid Plan. That's when it was still under the auspices of the Law Society. I'm not going to read this one. It just has the value of the home, and it was undervalued at $78,000. And then this is just an agreement, and it goes over what it was sold for. Over about $96,500. It was sold for $96,500. They took the lien off anyway. Legal Aid took the lien off. So that could have been added to the accounts of Legal Aid, but there's an example of how Legal Aid does not collect debts, and then they have no money, and then they cut certificates. Now, they cut the certificates in 1996 due to their miscalculations, and they did it again in 2016. And they took off legal aid certificates for persons who were dealing with their first criminal offense in court. So you had to go to a court without a lawyer. No representation. I was going to, if I have to look for it here and I can't find it just out of in this mess here. I have a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding in 1994 from Barrie, the NTP government, in which he expected legal aid, OLAP at the time, to make these drastic cuts, and that's what happened to me. And I'm sure there's a Memorandum of Understanding of our current Ministry of the Attorney General making the same request of Legal Aid Ontario to make drastic cuts like they did. So now we've got a constitutional crisis, and the Police Service of Windsor are taking advantage of it, not reading constitutional rights before they slap handcuffs on individuals like myself. And that's what they did. And it's also being taken advantage of by local lawyers, as well as the University of Windsor's community legal assistance students that work there, the CLA. They have no respect for the Canadian Constitution or the rights and the duty of a police officer to read a person those rights. It's the attitude of the students at CLA is indifference. And to the lawyers that were working at CLA, indifference. This is the supreme law of Canada, is our Constitution and those Charter of Rights. And it's imperative for law professionals, police officers, to read those rights to people. And you can't just dismiss those. Oh well, gee, we're sorry that happened. That's the attitude that I got from CLA, from the student lawyers there, and they're getting their information from the lawyers that work in the office. It could be a good program if constitutional rights were not violated. In that case, it should not, they shouldn't be allowed to handle cases when there's been a violation of constitutional rights. They don't care. And it shouldn't be running. Like, legal aid just can't flippantly deny that there's a constitution, Canadian Constitution, and treat charter rights flippantly like they have been doing by denying certificates. So somehow I seem to be getting caught up in these little events with Legal Aid Ontario. But as a result, they've spawned a constitutional crisis, and it's being taken advantage of. And it's replete in Windsor, and it needs to stop.